Today, we uncover the shocking truth about UK supermarket gravies. Cast your mind back to a proper Sunday afternoon. The joint has just come out of the oven, and there it is, sitting at the bottom of the roasting tin, that dark, sticky, glorious layer of meat juices and brown bits that you could never buy in a shop. Your mum or your nan would set that tin over a low flame, whisk in a spoonful of flour with a wooden spoon until it turned into a smooth paste, and then slowly pour in the hot water from the boiled cabbage or the cauliflower. Never the starchy water from the potatoes, because everybody knew that was the golden rule. A minute of patient stirring, a good grind of black pepper, maybe a small spoonful of Marmite for a bit of depth, and you had a glossy, rich, dark gravy that tasted of proper food, because it was proper food. Now wander down the aisle of your local supermarket and look at what gravy has quietly become. Beige powder in a cardboard tub, little foil cubes that are mostly salt, plastic pots of wobbling jelly held together by ingredients, and gums most of us would struggle to pronounce. Somewhere along the line, the one thing that tied the whole roast dinner together got hollowed out, and most shoppers never noticed because the packaging still shows a steaming jug beside a picture-perfect Sunday roast. On supermarket shelves today, there's the iconic Heritage Cube that once fed British soldiers in the trenches of the First World War, sold as nourishing meat extract, and which now contains just 4.5% beef fat, sitting on a base of wheat flour and salt. There's the famous chicken gravy that quietly shrank its tub while the price stayed exactly where it was, and now leans on flavor enhancers because it only contains 2% actual chicken. And there's a beef stock cube so heavily loaded that it's over 50% salt by its own weight, sold to you as the honest foundation of a family meal. So we've gone through the major gravy brands sitting on UK supermarket shelves right now, and we'll count down the 7 gravy and stock products we think you're better off leaving on the shelf. Then we'll reveal the 4 that are genuinely still worth your money, including one old favourite that's been hiding in plain sight on that very same shelf for over a century. Before we get stuck in, please do us one small favour. Tap the like button and, more importantly, hit that hype button underneath this video. The hype button is how smaller channels like ours break through, and every single tap helps push this investigation in front of more shoppers who deserve to know exactly what they're paying for. This isn't about us, it's about sending a clear message to these companies that we've stopped falling for heritage pictures and clever packaging, and that we want real food at a fair price. When enough of us push back together, standards have to improve. So get yourself comfortable, and let's separate the gravy that still deserves a place on your Sunday table from the stuff that's been coasting on its good name for far too long. And let's get into it. Number 7. Morrisons, the best beef gravy granules. We're starting with a product designed to make you feel like you're treating yourself. The best range sits right at the top of Morrisons' own label shelf, with the darker, classier packaging and the higher price tag that's supposed to whisper quality. You might reasonably expect that a premium beef gravy would, at the very least, contain a respectable amount of beef. Have a proper look at the label, though, and you'll find beef makes up just 1% of what's inside that jar. 1%. The rest is the same cast you'll find in the very cheapest granules on the shelf: potato starch, palm oil, salt, maltodextrin and hydrolyzed maize protein, all tinted a convincing brown with ammonia caramel and a touch of paprika extract. That's the trick here, and it's a clever one. There's a genuine psychology to the word best. It's placed at eye level, dressed up to look like a step above, and priced accordingly. But a granule is a granule, and no amount of premium styling changes the fact that you're buying a tub of starch and vegetable fat with a rounding error's worth of actual meat stirred in. If you took the fancy jar away and read out the ingredients blind, you honestly couldn't tell it apart from the budget stuff 2 shelves down. Think about what that premium jar is really promising you. The darker label, the serif lettering, the 200-gram jar positioned at eye level where your hand naturally reaches, every bit of that is designed to signal roast dinner luxury before you've even read a word. And yet the beef content, the one thing that would justify the word best, comes in at a single percent. Contrast that with what your nan actually made: a spoonful of golden dripping from the butcher, thickened into the meat juices, costing pennies, and tasting of the joint itself. That's the real premium, and it never needed a fancy label to prove it. The modern own-label luxury range simply inverts the whole idea, charging you extra for the appearance of quality while delivering a formula that's 99% everything except beef. There's a widespread feeling among long-time shoppers that own-label premium ranges have become one of the great confidence tricks of the modern supermarket. And beef gravy granules are a perfect example. You're paying more for the impression of quality, not the substance of it. If the product genuinely contained more roast beef, more of what actually makes gravy taste of something, then a higher price would be fair enough. Paying premium money for 1% beef simply isn't. It earns its place at number 7 not because it's the worst thing on this list, but because it's the clearest proof that a smart-looking label can charge you extra for almost nothing. Number 6. Bisto Traditional Gravy Granules. Now we come to the name that, for millions of British families, simply is gravy. Bisto has been part of the national kitchen since 1908, and back then, it was a genuinely useful little product. A simple powder you added to your own meat juices to help them brown and thicken into something glossy. It was designed to enhance real food, not replace it. That's the heritage the brand still trades on today, with the warm packaging and that famous smell everyone claims to recognize. The modern tub of traditional granules is a very different animal from that original idea. Turn it over, and the first 2 ingredients are potato starch and maltodextrin, followed by palm fat and salt. There's no meat in there doing the heavy lifting at all. The savory punch that's supposed to say roast dinner comes instead from flavor enhancers, monosodium glutamate, and disodium ribonucleotides, propped up on a base of starch and vegetable fat and colored brown with ammonia caramel. Now, let's be completely fair about the MSG, because we got this wrong in the past and plenty of you rightly called it out. MSG is not the dangerous villain people panicked about decades ago. It's a perfectly safe, naturally occurring flavor enhancer, and there's nothing sinister about it on a label. But that's exactly the point worth making. A company only needs to reach for a chemical flavor crutch when it's stripped out the real thing that used to provide the flavor for free. Real slow-cooked beef doesn't need a laboratory to taste of beef. When the savoriness has to be bolted on afterwards, it tells you everything about how little of the genuine article is left in the tub. And here's the part that stings for anyone who grew up on it. Some long-time buyers now say the modern granules taste faintly of soap and that they have to spoon in nearly twice as much just to get any real depth, which rather defeats the point of a convenient shortcut. Bisto remains the dominant name in British gravy by a country mile, and its parent company, Premier Foods, reported strong branded revenue growth again in its summer trading update, comfortably on track to hit its full-year targets. In other words, the tills are ringing, demand is stable, and there's very little commercial pressure to put the real ingredients back in. A product can coast on affection and habit for a very long time, and this is precisely what that looks like. That's why this old giant sits at number 6, still leaning on a name it earned more than a century ago for a product that barely resembles the one that built it. Number 5. Waitrose Essential Meat Gravy Granules. There's a comforting assumption a lot of us make, which is that if you shop somewhere a bit more upmarket, you'll automatically get a better product. This one is here to gently correct that idea. Waitrose has a well-earned reputation for quality, and you'd be forgiven for thinking their own label gravy granules would reflect it. The reality is more ordinary than the shop's image suggests. Read the Essential Granules label, and you'll find palm oil, color from ammonia caramel, hydrolyzed wheat protein and an emulsifier, sitting on the usual foundation of potato starch, salt and fortified wheat flour. In other words, it follows the same industrial recipe logic as granules from far cheaper shops. The palm oil is certified sustainable, which is a fair point in its favor, but the underlying formula is still fat and starch, dressed up with coloring and a protein hydrolysate to fake a savory, meaty note. And it's a small container too, 170 grams of granules that lean on exactly the same industrial thinking as the cheapest tubs on the market. The green branding, the calm typeface, the reassuring word essential all whisper honesty and restraint, the sort of pared-back, no-nonsense quality that shoppers happily pay a little extra for. But restraint in the marketing doesn't mean restraint in the recipe. It's worth remembering that this very same supermarket sells a genuinely superb gravy elsewhere in its range, which we'll come to later. So this isn't a swipe at the shop itself. It's a warning that the badge on the door guarantees you nothing once you've turned the packet over. That traditional, wholesome image the store carries is doing an awful lot of work here. The green branding and the essential name imply something honest and pared back, and shoppers reasonably read that as better. But when it comes to the actual composition of the granules, walking through the doors of a posh supermarket doesn't magically protect you from a tub of industrial slop. It's a genuinely useful reminder that you cannot judge a product by the postcode of the shop it comes from. You have to turn the packet over and read what's actually in it every single time, no matter how reassuring the logo on the front looks. Number 4. Knorr Beef Gravy Pot. These little pots have become enormously popular, and it's easy to see why. They come as a small tub of glossy, wobbling jelly that you spoon into hot water, and that jelly texture is doing something very deliberate. It's designed to look and behave like the real thing, like the rich, set, gelatinous stock you get when you slowly simmer meat and bones for hours and let it cool. That wobble is a visual promise of proper old-fashioned cooking. Here's what's really holding that promise together. The Knorr beef pot contains 3.5% beef fat, and the luxurious set texture isn't coming from slow-cooked bones at all. It's engineered using a trio of gelling agents: locust bean gum, xanthan gum, and gallon gum. That's a genuine feat of food technology, and there's nothing unsafe about it, but it's structural engineering standing in for cooking. The pot is built to mimic the appearance of something that took a butcher's worth of bones and half a day on the stove, when in fact it's water, starch, salt, sugar, a little beef fat, and a clever combination of gums. It's worth noting where this brand sits right now too. Knorr is one of the biggest stock and gravy names on the planet. And in the summer of 2026, the UK's competition watchdog opened a public review of a $44 billion deal that would see the American spice giant behind so many supermarket seasonings swallow up the food division that owns it. Meanwhile, the professional catering version of the very same brand was busy collecting a Best Stock Brand trophy from the trade. None of that is sinister on its own, but it's a useful reminder of the scale we're dealing with. The wobbling little pot on your worktop isn't the product of a family kitchen slaving over bones. It's a globally engineered convenience item produced at enormous scale and priced to make that gum-set jelly look like something it simply isn't. The impression the product gives is homemade depth and richness. The current ingredient list tells a more complicated story. It's a well-designed convenience product wearing the costume of a slow-cooked stock. If you're happy paying for the convenience, that's your call to make. But you should at least know that the thing you're admiring, that satisfying jelly wobble, is a texture recipe rather than a sign of real meat and bone. It's a case study in how modern food can be made to look far more traditional than it actually is. Before we carry on, we'd genuinely love to hear from you on this one. Drop a comment and tell us your nan's secret gravy ingredient. Was it a spoonful of Marmite stirred into the tin, a knob of proper yellow beef dripping from the butcher, a splash of the cabbage water, and be honest, do you still follow the golden rule and refuse to touch the starchy potato water? We read these, and the best tips deserve to be passed on. Number 3. Aldi Queijo Beef Stock Cubes. Now we come to a product that provokes a very reasonable defense, and we want to tackle it head-on, because you deserve better than lazy scaremongering. According to Action on Salt, an Aldi Queijo beef stock cube is over 50% salt by weight, roughly 5 grams of salt packed into a single little cube. Now, a lot of savvy home cooks will immediately, and rightly, point out that you don't sit down and eat a stock cube whole. You crumble it into a pot and dilute it across a stew for the whole family, so the salt per portion ends up far lower. That's a completely fair point, and it's true. But here's why it still matters. Even once you've done the maths and spread it across a meal, you're still handing over your money for a product that is at its very core a compressed block of brown salt. The stock cube is supposed to be a concentrated hit of beef flavor. Look at the order of the ingredients, and salt comes first, ahead of palm oil and cornstarch, with beef extract trailing behind at just 4%. So the flavor you think you're paying for is mostly seasoning, not stock. You could achieve a very similar result with your own salt and a fraction of the cost. Look a little closer at that ingredient order, and it tells the whole story. Salt comes first, ahead of palm oil, ahead of cornstarch, ahead of the yeast extract, with beef extract limping in at around 4% behind a dusting of rosemary. For a product whose entire job is to taste of beef, that ordering is quietly damning. And salt is very much in the regulator's sights at the moment. In the summer of 2026, the food industry's own trade body was openly warning the government that tighter rules on salt, sugar and fat could disrupt how these products are made and promoted. That tells you the salt levels in this corner of the shop aren't an accident of one cube, they're baked into an entire category that has quietly leaned on cheap seasoning for years. This is the honest way to read a stock cube. It's not that one cube is going to do you harm in a pot of stew for 6, it's that you're buying something marketed as a foundation of beefy richness that turns out to be salt doing the vast majority of the talking. For anyone genuinely watching their salt across a whole day of processed foods, and plenty of older shoppers have very good reason to, it's worth knowing just how salt-heavy these little cubes really are before you build your cooking around them. Number 2. Bisto Best Chicken Gravy Granules. We're back to Bisto, but this time to their best chicken variety, and this one manages to combine two of the most frustrating trends in the supermarket into a single glass jar. The first is shrinkflation, or as it's sometimes called, skimpflation. Back in 2024, the tub quietly dropped from 250 grams down to 230 grams. 20 grams gone, with no fanfare, no announcement, and certainly no matching drop in price. It's the sort of change that's designed to slip past you, because who stands in the aisle weighing their gravy granules? Yet over time, that's less product in your cupboard for the same money or more. The second issue is what's actually in the jar. The first ingredient on the label is maltodextrin, followed by potato starch, salt, and a blend of palm and rapeseed oils. The chicken? Just 2% chicken powder with a little chicken fat. And here, once again, monosodium glutamate and disodium ribonucleotides step in to carry the savory, chickeny flavor that the tiny amount of real chicken simply can't deliver on its own. To be crystal clear, those enhancers are safe. That's not the complaint. The complaint is that they're being used as an inexpensive stand-in because genuine chicken costs more than the recipe is willing to spend. It's sold today in smart recyclable glass jars in a range of sizes, hinting at something wholesome and store-cupboard traditional. Turn it in the light, though, and the honest picture is a tub built on maltodextrin and starch, with a whisper of chicken powder and chicken fat stirred through. Consumer groups have flagged for years just how thin the real poultry content in these gravies has become, and once you've clocked that first ingredient, you can't unsee it. This is the recurring pattern of the modern gravy aisle. Shrink the pack, hold the price, and quietly let a laboratory do the work that a roast chicken used to do for nothing. So you've got a product that gives you less than it used to, charges you at least as much as it did before, and fills the flavor gap left by missing chicken with laboratory savoriness. Plenty of long-time buyers have noticed their favorite chicken gravy just doesn't taste the way they remember, and this is precisely why. It hasn't got smaller by accident, and it hasn't got its flavor from a roasting tin. It's a heritage product being managed for margin, and it lands at number 2. If this is the kind of plain-spoken label-reading investigation you want more of, do consider subscribing. We're working through the supermarket shelves, one category at a time, and there's a lot more to expose. Number 1. OXO beef stock cubes. And so we reach number 1, and it's a product that, more than any other on this list, represents a genuine betrayal of what it once stood for. OXO is woven into the fabric of British history. It famously supplied nourishing meat extract to soldiers in the trenches of the First World War, sold on the honest promise of concentrated beef strength in a tiny, convenient form. That red cube in its little foil wrapper was for generations shorthand for real, sustaining, meaty goodness. It's one of the most trusted names in the British kitchen. To understand quite how far this one has drifted, it helps to picture where it came from. In the mud and cold of that war, the little cube was pressed into service as a genuine source of nourishment and warmth, a hot, beefy drink that a soldier could make from boiling water alone when there was precious little else to be had. It was sold on a simple, honest promise: concentrated strength from real meat in a form small enough to slip into a tunic pocket. For decades afterwards, that red cube meant something in the British kitchen. It was trust you could taste, handed down from one generation to the next. Now read what's in the modern cube produced today under Premier Foods. The first ingredient is wheat flour, then salt, then maize starch and yeast extract. The actual beef content amounts to 4.5% beef fat, supported by a little dried beef bone stock, and, you guessed it, the savoury lift is topped up with monosodium glutamate and disodium guanylate, coloured brown with ammonia caramel. So the icon that was once celebrated as a hit of pure meat extract is now, in essence, seasoned, thickened flour with a modest dose of beef fat. Let's be accurate, because we're not here to exaggerate. It isn't a cube with no meat in it at all. There is beef fat and bone stock in there, but the gap between the reputation and the reality is enormous. The name still carries all the weight of that wartime heritage, all that trust built up over more than a century, and the current cube simply doesn't live up to the promise the brand still leans on. And the brand is doing perfectly well on that inherited trust. Premier Foods reported healthy branded growth again in the summer of 2026, and earlier that year, OXO was fronting a nationwide instant win promotion splashed right across packs in every big supermarket. There's marketing money and momentum here in abundance. What there isn't, on the current label, is very much of the beef the whole legend was built on. That's what makes it the most striking entry on this list. It isn't the saltiest, and it isn't the emptiest. It's the one where the distance between what the country believes it's buying and what's genuinely in the wrapper is at its very widest. For a brand that earned its place feeding a nation through its hardest years, that's a real shame. So that's the 7 we'd steer you away from. But we made you a promise, and we know the single biggest complaint about this kind of video is that it's all doom and no solutions. So let's fix that properly. Here's the simple rule of thumb. Good gravy and good stock read like a recipe, not a chemistry experiment. You want to see real ingredients near the top of the list, proper bone stock, actual meat and meat fat like beef dripping, real wine, and honest thickeners like corn flour. You want to see the featured meat appearing as a meaningful percentage, not a rounding error. And you generally want to avoid products built around maltodextrin, palm fat, and a long tail of enhancers standing in for flavor that should have come from the meat itself. With that in mind, here are 4 that genuinely earn a place in your cupboard. First, and this may surprise you, is Bisto Original Gravy Powder. Yes, the very same brand we criticized twice, because there's an enormous and completely justified divide in British kitchens between the modern granules and this old boxed powder. They are not the same thing. The original powder is essentially unchanged from the traditional idea. Potato starch, salt, wheat starch, a little ammonia caramel for color, onion powder, and inactive yeast. Crucially, there's no palm oil and no MSG in there at all. It was never meant to be gravy on its own. It's a pure, honest thickener and browning agent designed to be stirred into your real meat juices and your vegetable water exactly the way your nan did it. Used properly, it's brilliant, and it's cheap. If you want that authentic dark glossy finish, this humble box is the one to reach for. Second is the Waitrose #1 Beef and Bone Marrow Gravy. This is about as close to homemade as a chilled supermarket tub gets, and the label backs it up. It's built on 66% roast beef bone stock with 9% Cabernet Sauvignon red wine and 3% beef bone marrow for genuine richness and body. It's reportedly slow-simmered to develop that depth, and you can taste where the money went. It isn't the cheapest option on the shelf, and it doesn't pretend to be, but this is real cooking done for you, with real ingredients leading the list rather than starch and colouring. If you want to serve something you can be proud of without 3 hours over the hob, this is the gold standard. Third is the Cook with M&S concentrated beef stock, the little jar so many of you have been asking us to look at. It fully deserves the attention. The very first ingredient is beef extract, made from beef bones, beef and beef fat, and it carries no added vegetable oils. It's a genuine concentrated beef bone extract with real depth, meant to be spooned into your own cooking as a proper flavor base for gravies, stews and casseroles. Used sparingly, 1 jar goes a very long way, which quietly makes it good value too. It's a real secret weapon, and it does exactly what a concentrated stock is supposed to do, which is deliver honest beef flavor from actual beef. Fourth is Potts Beef and Red Wine Gravy, and we love seeing a proper independent doing things the right way. Potts now sells this in a smart, fully recyclable aluminium can, having moved over to cans as part of a wider packaging refresh. And the recipe reads like something a cook would actually make: water, a beef stock base with real beef fat, real red wine, and corn flour to thicken. There's a small amount of certified sustainable palm oil within the bouillon component, so we'll always be straight with you about that, but the overall approach here is real ingredients in sensible proportions rather than a starch and enhancer formula wearing a costume. It reads like a recipe, not a lab report, and that's exactly what you want. It can be a little harder to track down in the big chains, so you'll often find it in butchers, farm shops and online, but it's well worth seeking out. And that, in a nutshell, is the whole story of modern gravy. The good news is that proper options still exist, from a 100-year-old boxed powder to a genuine independent in a can. The bad news is that far too many of the biggest, most trusted names have quietly swapped real meat for starch, palm fat, and clever flavorings while keeping the heritage pictures and the premium prices firmly in place. The power to change that sits with us, on the shelf, every single week when we turn the packet over and actually read it. If this helped you shop a little smarter, please give the video a like and hit that hype button to help more shoppers find it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation, and let us know in the comments which food or product category you want us to put under the microscope next. Until next time, read your labels, trust your taste buds, and protect your plate.